So let's get into it. Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year rule over Libya came to a violent end in 2011 following a NATO-led intervention that has since been criticized as an abuse of UN mandates and a catalyst for an ongoing instability in that region. While Western media has often portrayed Gaddafi as a brutal dictator, this narrative overlooks the significant social and economic progress Libya made under his leadership. So his achievements. In economic prosperity, Libya transformed one of the poorest countries in Africa to one of the ones with the highest development index in Africa. The nationalization of oil resources allowed Libya to invest heavily into social programs and infrastructure. So what he did was immediately took power and nationalized the oil, which, of course, anybody knows that Libya is an extremely oil-rich nation. That had been previously extracted by Western imperialism, okay? You'll follow a trend here in seeing why we hated him so much. We only hate the people who don't give us their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to education, Gaddafi's government prioritized education, raising the literacy rate from 25% to 88%. Education was free at all levels, and students often received scholarships to study abroad. Okay. Healthcare. Libya developed a robust free healthcare system that was considered one of the best in the Middle East and North Africa. Life expectancy increased from 51 to 74 during the years of Gaddafi's rule.
That's crazy.
Housing. Gaddafi considered housing a human right. I'll say that again. Dictator Muammar Gaddafi considered housing a human right. His government provided interest-free loans for the home purchases and implemented extensive public housing projects. Women's rights. Gaddafi's Libya was a progressive in terms of women's rights for the region. Women had equal rights to education, employment, and divorce. This was totally away from the normal of that region. Infrastructure. The Great Man-Made River Project, one of the largest irrigation projects in the world, was initiated to provide water to Libya's desert regions. This was something that Gaddafi did in his time. African unity. He was also a strong advocate for African unity and independence from Western influence. He often was using Libya's oil wealth to support other African nations. So in 2011, the intervention, ostensibly that was to protect civilians, quickly evolved into a campaign for regime change. The action was based on unverified claims of impending massacres and human rights abuses, which were later questioned by independent investigations. So there was no evidence that Gaddafi ever committed any human rights violations. There was rumors, there was some testimonies, but there was no ever concrete evidence. Maybe some circumstantial evidence, but nothing irrefutable. Okay. So
there was also a lot of evidence of American weapons being used by the quote-unquote moderate rebels. I don't know if this is going to appear later on in your article, but that is what we did see, was a lot of chemical weapons with American branding on them being used by the moderate rebels that were standing up against the quote-unquote dictator. So,
and as we do this show, that won't be the last place that we hear about that's the case, where the United States has their weapons stamped "Made in America" on a pile of dead bodies. The intervention in 2011 ended up in destabilization. Libya descended into chaos. We had rival factions fighting for control, creating a power vacuum that allows all extremist groups to gain footholds. The impending economic collapse. The economy Libya once had, that was the most prosperous in Africa, has been devastated and hasn't recovered since. Oil production plummeted and the country's sovereign wealth fund has been depleted. Then a humanitarian crisis broke out that was led to thousands of deaths and displaced millions. And now there's a refugee crisis affecting neighboring countries and Europe, which now we're pushing people out of boats into the ocean instead. And you know what they say? They say, please don't send us back to Libya because they'll kill us. So they would rather die and take their chances jumping into the Mediterranean than go back to Libya, most of them. It's terrible. And we pretend like the Arab Spring was going to bring democracy to the Middle East and things were going to be better. And so we intervene in these countries, and it's not to spread democracy. It's to sow chaos. And because a country in chaos is a lot easier to take over. Now, they also, the destabilization of Libya also led to the emergence of modern-day slave markets, which is, sets the whole country back centuries, if not millennia. Western media often focus on Gaddafi's eccentricities, and his allegations of human rights abuses while downplaying or ignoring his achievements. This is a clear, this is manipulation on behalf of the West, yet again, as a way to avert the eyes away from socialist ideas that might be working in the world. And of course, we want their stuff, again.
Can you think of any other situation, Chris, where like a leader who may have been socialist, maybe not even like a perfect principled socialist that we would like to see, came into power, started nationalizing resources to use for the benefit of his own people to build up and develop his own country rather than to simply siphon the profits off to Western countries, and then was deposed violently, and then the chaos and destabilization after the fact based on the Western regime change and imposition of a right-wing regime was then blamed on communism or socialism? I cannot think of a single situation in which that happened. I mean, to the point where they call it the Libya fucking method. They call it the Libya method. Like,
yeah. It's
just saying.
playbook. It's playbook. It's textbook. Crack open the textbook. There it is. How to bake a cake. How to take over a country and steal their shit. 101. Totally.
But no, I mean, it was just a coincidence that like the Arab Spring was allowed to exist and be fomented on Twitter, whereas every other social movement gets shut down, muted on Twitter when it starts to kick off a little bit. It's just a coincidence that, like, again, the American weapons showed up in the hands of the moderate rebels. Just the fact that people accepted the words moderate rebels. When you see how moderates behave in any Western country or any other country, they behave according to their class position. They want things to stay the same. They don't get out in the streets and rebel. They just want peace and stability because they're making money. That's why they're moderates. Like, the fact that people accepted that shows how brainwashed everyone is, and they accepted the Arab Spring as like a legit thing as opposed to a color revolution. Sorry, I'm getting mad again.
Gaddafi is the litmus test for people to see where they're at with living on Earth, how aware they are of the world that they live in. I was fooled. He was a bizarre guy. He walked around with a sheet wrapped around him. I didn't know any better. You live in a unicultural island, far away from anything fun or anything spicy or interesting or foreign, My wife speaks 4 different languages. I can speak more now that I'm German, but growing up, you could only speak English and even Spanish. It's like, they don't even want you to talk to your neighbors in Mexico. It's like, come on. So the 4 points, though, that are overlooked in Western media about this whole thing that had us bamboozled in the first place was Libya under Gaddafi had the highest standard of living in Africa. Never heard about that. The country was debt-free and had substantial foreign reserves. Never heard about that. Gaddafi's support for anti-imperialist movements and African unity put him at odds with Western powers. I just knew that he was hated. Many of the human rights abuse allegations were exaggerated or unverified. Now, that's news to me, just a sad state of affairs but thankfully, the facade is breaking free, and we have the internet. We can see all this stuff. Now, we don't know if the shoe is on the other foot, what China's going to do, because I always, on my old reliable, I say, people are terrible. No matter what shoe, on which foot, on which country, which person. I told my wife, the Chinese could turn around and do the same thing. They're essentially the same creature, just a little bit shorter with a little slantier eyes. Basically the same beast as us. We're all the same.
Yeah, I mean, my only optimism is in the hope that people in China, because of the Communist Party and its provable gains, like actual material gains in recent years, that they've really internalized the ideas that it is better to create a sustainable system, even if it means slower profits for yourself, slower personal gains in the long run, that it's better. Because it seems like so much of the West has been built on the idea that we will pretend that we're going to build a sustainable system and we're going to create products and services that serve everybody's best needs, right? And that's the promise of capitalism. It's like, if our product isn't serving your best needs, well, then people won't buy it and we will course correct. When in reality, what they do is bribe regulators. They poison you and then hide it. They lie. They do false advertising. They do planned obsolescence. Like any other shady trick they can do to make money. And my only hope is that people who have seen the other way of doing things have that negative example to look at and say, it actually is better to build something sustainable, because then it doesn't create the long-term instability that maybe you won't have to deal with, but maybe your grandkids will. And I'm hoping that's the case. But again, only time will tell. We won't know, you know.
Yeah, it's going to take a while before we see anything fruitful come out of any even radical or incremental change. It's going to take forever to actually see stuff happen. But it brings up my favorite motto, you kids out there. It's, a real man is somebody who plants trees for shade that he will not be able to enjoy. You know?
Wasn't that Mao?
I don't know. I think it's Jesus, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's either Jesus or Mao.
One of those two great guys.
Chairman Jesus.